Is our education system an equitable experience for all children? It's a hypothetical question which has varying answers depending on who you speak with. But one thing is abundantly clear: there is still more work to do when it comes to ensuring that we level the playing field to ensure an equal shot at success inside and outside of the classroom for all American children. Collin Jewett is an industrial engineer, an author, and an accelerated learning coach from the mountains of Colorado. After publishing his first book, Out of Your Wheelhouse, he turned his attention to helping others to pursue meaningful goals within your career. My friends, we had an in-depth conversation about life, its fragility, education equality, equity, and how we can create more opportunities for advancements in education, careers, and society. Jewett was intentional to provide some wide-ranging and comprehensive answers to some of the more pressing issues of the day. So be sure to listen with intent and great interest when you listen to this latest conversation, which I was privileged to have. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, I'll take a moment and wish you a happy Friday, and I welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn about your personal and professional journey. Great to see you this afternoon, and thank you, my friend, for a few minutes.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So, Colin, I'm wanting you to tell me, to start our conversation, just a 360-degree view of about your life and what makes you so fabulous, my friend.
Well, I come from Indiana, cornfields. That's where I was born and raised, and I
A proud Midwestern boy, right?
yeah. Yeah, raised on corn and cornbread. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No.
Corn and cornbread, right?
Nothing wrong with that. My wife and I live in Colorado with our young son now. He was born in August, so just a few months ago. And yeah, I run a few programs. I run a psychology program, as well as I run the company Superhuman Academy. We teach people how to learn faster and level up their life skills. So that's the super short version.
Absolutely, and I know that you're also an industrial engineer and author, and as you said, you are a coach who helps people accelerate their learning. So the work that you do sounds fascinating, my friend. So how do you balance your day, and what's the most exciting part of it? I'm fascinated to know.
Yeah, I'll start with the most exciting part, I guess. I really just enjoy helping people to spend more time doing things that they love and less time doing things they don't. So I focus on helping people to rediscover and rekindle their curiosity from childhood. I think that that's something that a lot of adults especially have lost, and they just kind of go about their day. It's kind of on autopilot, monotonous, and they've lost a lot of that sparkle, a lot of that joy. And so I try to help people get that back. And what's really interesting about that is that by reigniting your curiosity, you also end up being a lot more productive, which is not something that people typically really think about. They don't think that the key to more productivity is to be more curious and interested, but it is, turns out. So that's pretty good. It's a win-win, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always tell people if you're curious, you can define what your passions are in life. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that curiosity is the root of most things in terms of taking meaningful action in your life.
The good, the bad, and the ugly, right?
Yeah, yeah, it can be ugly sometimes.
Absolutely. So, my friend, I know you currently, as you said, live in Colorado, and you're originally from Indiana. So, what do you miss most about home, and what have you fallen in love with in the Colorado mountains, my friend? What do you like to do for fun?
Yeah, it's a good question. Indiana is interesting because it's not very interesting. So, I mean, what I mean by that is like nobody goes to Indiana for tourism. It's not like a big hot spot for that. But I think what happens when you live in places that aren't maybe great for tourism is that you invest a lot more time in the other things. So it's a place where a lot of people go to raise families. So that's cool. I do miss that environment a lot of times. It's more family oriented. However, I will say I really enjoy the natural beauty of Colorado, and it's kind of the opposite in a lot of ways. The people who live here, a lot of them are not from here originally, and so a lot of people are more actively seeking new friends and new community. So it's pretty easy to find people to to connect with here.
Yeah, absolutely. And Colin, talking to you for about 5 minutes now, but I can see that building social capital and community is important to you, and helping people sort of find their sense of community and belonging. It's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast. I started it in quarantine, buddy, because I told myself that there was only so much Netflix I could watch in a day, right? So I wanted to do something other than watch the latest romantic flick on Netflix. So I started the podcast. But the question is, how important do you think building a social capital and community is, my friend?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot more recently. I think it's a really important thing to consider, especially with quarantine. A lot more people have been isolated in recent years, and so I've been thinking more, and I really think it's difficult to be healthy in isolation. I don't know if it's really even maybe it's possible, but I don't know what that looks like to really be healthy by yourself. And so, yeah, I mean, working with coaching clients, I think it's not something I focused on early in my coaching career, but now it is something I pay a lot more attention to. Is if somebody's really struggling to do things that are meaningful in their life, they're struggling to be productive, they're struggling to be engaged, one of the first things to look at is, are you actually interacting with other people? And if the answer is no, then that's probably worth considering. It's difficult to be productive or really do anything worthwhile when you're just by yourself all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share just a little bit about myself. I don't know how much research you did on me personally, but I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally, and it affects all four major parts of my limbs. So, but one of the tenets that I live my life by is that inclusion is the gateway to independence. So when you think about the word inclusion from a diversity standpoint, I'm curious, what do you think of when you think of the word inclusion?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that kind of goes along with the curiosity element I mentioned before. If you have any system, whether it's doesn't really matter what kind of system it is, whether it's a human system or even a mechanical system, the more, let's say, homogeneous and uniform it is, the more prone to single points of failure it is. So meaning it's not flexible. It can't respond to changes in the environment. And so I think when it comes to diversity, inclusion, all those things, it comes down to adaptability and flexibility to some degree. It's like if you only have one perspective, that perspective is going to have a lot of holes in it. If you have a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different angles, lots of different people, then you build a community, you build a system that's much more robust. So I know that was kind of using more technical, sterile language, but I think when it comes to people, it's like if you want to have a life that's meaningful and interesting, then uniformity, I don't think is probably going to get you there. I think that's what people experience when they just do the exact same things every day with the same people or lack of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming from an industrial engineer, I'm not surprised. I got a technical answer, but that's good. And I know that the process of writing your first book really exposed you to sort of wanting to help people pursue their own goals and aspirations. So tell me about the process of writing a book, the emotions you went through while writing it, because I know writing books isn't easy, and why it spearheaded you to wanting to help more people.
Yeah, so writing my first book, I wrote it while I was still in college, actually. I published it right when I graduated at Purdue. And I didn't start writing it as a book. I started writing it as just my personal notes, my own journaling and reflections and everything. And then I thought, well, maybe I should, I have a younger, brother-in-law. Maybe I should pass this on to him. I'll format it so it's easier for someone else to read. And then eventually I was like, well, why not, why not just make this into like a real book and put it out there for whoever might find it useful. So the book itself, it's largely just kind of me starting to discover how to unlock my own potential. And it's really early in that process. So if anyone reads it, they'll see like, I think a lot of the thoughts in there they're kind of the seed of much bigger ideas, but they're not super fleshed out. 'Cause I was just starting to figure some things out too. So that book was really good for me because I think one of the most important things about writing is thinking. It helps you to think over through more complex ideas, more complex arguments than you're able to just without writing. So for me, it really helped me to start develop my thinking more. And ever since I published that book, I write a lot. I mean, I've probably written, I don't know, 6 or 7 books worth since I wrote that book. I've only published one other one, but but I write all the time because writing is how you think more critically and evaluate yourself and get more diversity in your perspective. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Of course, yeah, buddy. I'll share this with you, buddy. I went to so when I went to college, I majored in communication and journalism. So I talk and write all the time, buddy. It's a therapeutic process, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's really important.
And I know, Collin, that educational equity and equality is important to you. So when you look at the state of education today, what do you think of from a equality and equity standpoint? Where have we made the most progress, and what do you think we still need to go?
Yeah, that's a big question. Education is kind of my I guess primary semi-professional personal passion. So I spend a lot of time thinking about education. I think what education fundamentally is, it's your preparedness for life, specifically the life that you want to lead. So the more educated you are, the more prepared you are to lead the life that you want to lead. So that looks different for everybody because people want to lead different lives. And I think one of the problems with the way that at least we do education in America is that we don't really prepare people for their individual lives. We prepare them for kind of a generic average life, which it doesn't really exist, right? There isn't really, like, nobody's really the average person. And so I don't know. I don't really think that effective education can be done in the way that we do it. I don't think it's really something that you do by standardizing. I think it's something that you do by allowing people to self-direct and giving them a space to do that. So we could definitely go further in the weeds there if you want to, but we can go wherever you want from there.
Yeah, no, because I'll pick up on this because, for me personally, Colin, I'm a vocational learner. I learn better by doing experiences than reading a textbook. So there are multiple layers of learning. And I just want to pick up on the importance of not sort of putting education in a box, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so when I work with my clients are almost all professional adults, so I don't really work with kids very much at this point in my career, though I'd like to go that direction more in the future. But what I found is when I'm working with adults, a lot of times the reason that they reach out for a learning coach is because they don't know how to pursue something independently. In other words, they don't know what they should be doing. They don't know how they should be doing it. They're kind of dependent on other people to tell them what to do. And I think that dependency arises from the way that we do K through 12 and even college education, which is you get assigned assignments, right? They're called assignments because they're assigned to you by somebody else. You get told what to do all throughout, but there's rarely the opportunity or the space to ask yourself that question of, what do I want to do? And I think sometimes that question actually gets pushed out too long term. So, for example, like if you ask a high school student, what do you want to do with your life? That's a really difficult question, especially for a high school student to answer. It's like, what do I want to do with my life? I don't know. That's really big. But I think we fail to ask even the small question, which is, what do you want to do right now, today, this hour, this minute? I don't think that question really gets asked. I don't think that question is encouraged. At least when I was in school, certainly wasn't. It was, here's what we're doing right now. It wasn't, what would you like to be doing right now? And I think that it's really dangerous to not ask that question because if you get used to not asking that question, you never ask that question. And then you just sit around waiting for somebody to tell you what to do. And that's what I find with a lot of my clients. They just haven't asked that question in years. And if you don't ask that, then you won't be curious. And if you're not curious, you won't be creative. And if you're not creative, you won't remember anything. So you won't be able to learn very effectively.
Well, that's why I wanted to have this podcast to allow for diverse conversations, because I think having a diverse perspective helps you learn. Colin, one of the other tenets that I'm a quote guy, so I live my life through quotes. But one of the quotes that I live my life by is something that I came up with is, well, the day you stop learning is the day that you die. I think you always try to challenge yourself to be better. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think if you're going to live a life that is meaningful and fulfilling, then it's going to be one of continuous growth. I don't know. I don't think I've ever really interacted with somebody who said that they felt that their life was fulfilled, complete, totally satisfying if they weren't challenging themselves in some way.
Yeah, and just building on that, I'm going to ask you a big, broader question, and feel free to take it any way you'd like. But, one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you today was about the psychology of America and how we really fix it, because when you turn on the news and you go out into society, so many people are quick to go into what I call their partisan corners, when you and I grew up, Colin, there was a lot of more understanding about you can disagree with a person without dismantling sort of their character and the psychological sort of course of their development. So feel free to take this question any way you want, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on how we really fix or address the psychology of America and really build more bridges of unity?
Oh man, that's a that's a very, very big question.
That's
Uh,
why I saved it for you, because you're
yeah.
going to give me a fascinating answer, I'm sure.
All right. I'll give you a small answer to the big question. I think that you pointed out part of it, which is I think that in America and more broadly too, but especially here, I think one of the biggest challenges that we face, and I don't know, this is just a reflection of my current thinking, but it might be one of the biggest challenges that humanity faces all the time, is ideological possession. It's when you are captured by a certain a set of ideas and you can't escape from it. I think it was Carl Jung, I could be misquoting, could be somebody else, but saying that people don't have ideas, ideas have people. And I think it's an interesting perspective, and I think it's a useful one, because a lot of times when you're talking to somebody, you'll notice that you're not really talking to the person, you're talking to a set of ideas that they seem to be representing. So you'll be talking to Republican, or you'll be talking to Democrat, or you'll be talking to Christian, you'll be talking to atheist. You won't be talking to the person, right? They're essentially just a mouthpiece for a certain set of ideas. And I think we need to at least, I think the first step to solving a problem is recognizing that you have one, right? I think that's true on an individual level. I think it's true on a national level and beyond. So I think people need to just realize that they might be ideologically possessed. They might be captured in a certain perspective. And if you find yourself repeating the same things over and over and over again and not asking very many questions, it's a pretty good sign that could be the case. And if that's the case, then there's not really any conversation happening. All there is post hoc rationalization. So I guess my encouragement to listeners and anyone beyond is just start to pay attention to your language patterns. Start to pay attention to how many questions that you're asking during the day. If you're giving a lot more answers than you are questions, then it's at least worth paying attention to and considering.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Colin, I know that you're a big guy in embracing sort of the sense of adventure. So how do you define the word adventure, and how do you have the most fun when you're not working?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just a nerd, honestly. Like the way that I go on adventures is, I mean, I'll go out and hike in the mountains and stuff like that. But honestly, I spend more time reading books and writing than I do hiking, even though I live, 10 minutes away from some very beautiful hikes. So my wife is more adventurous in the traditional sense than I am, which is great. She takes me outside, which is good. Otherwise, I can hide in my house for a long time. But to me, adventure, more broadly speaking, is running into the unknown. So it's exploring. It's going somewhere you haven't gone before, and that doesn't necessarily mean physically. It can be just exploring new ideas, which is what it largely is for me. I'm in my head quite a bit, but I find that to be really exciting and interesting. So I like to explore different philosophies and different perspectives and different questions and different answers to those questions from different people. That's how I go on adventures most of the time. But I think more broadly speaking, physically or not physically, it's delving into the unknown. It's finding things that you're afraid of and confronting them and running towards them rather than away.
Yeah, absolutely. And Colin, I'm curious, how do you define sort of personal fulfillment and the encouraging energy to persevere throughout a course of a day?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give my personal, I guess, big picture definition of fulfillment would be living in accordance with one's values. So, people have different values, right? But if you're misaligned with your values, then I don't think that you're going to be very fulfilled. I think that's like a very broad explanation or definition. And I do think that there are some kind of general principles that apply to everybody when it comes to fulfillment. I think one of them is that adventure. I think if you're not adventuring, then you're probably not going to feel fulfilled. And adventuring means confronting that which is frightening to you. It's running towards the unknown. And sometimes it's a very small way. It's just confronting. I mean, maybe there's a pile of papers on your desk that you've been avoiding sorting through. Something as simple as that. I mean, that can be fulfilling if you're like, hey, I'm scared to sort through these papers, and you go do it. That's confronting the things that you're afraid of. Or it could be something much bigger, but it doesn't really matter. I think it's dependent on the person. It's living in alignment with your values and confronting the things that scare you.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I was also wanting to ask you about growth and satisfaction because it can have different definitions for different people. So how do you personally define growth and satisfaction?
Yeah. So one model or like kind of mental model I like to use. So when people think of goals, goals are great, but they're often not well constructed. And I don't just mean like SMART goals. That's somewhat useful, but the way I see a goal is something that orients you in space. So you can kind of think of if you're floating out in space and it's just pitch black in every direction. If that was the case, and assuming you were alive, so you're floating around in space, if there was no light from any direction, then you actually would have no idea which direction you're traveling. You'd have no idea how fast you were going because you'd have no point of reference, right? So you could be going 10 million miles per hour. You could be standing still. You wouldn't know. It requires some sort of point of light, some sort of reference in order to tell which direction you're going and how fast you're going in that direction. And so when it comes to growth, what a goal does for people is it gives you a point of reference. And I think where people get trapped is they think that if you have a goal, then you should always be moving directly towards it. Like the best way to grow is to go directly towards the goal. And that's almost, in my experience, never the case. And what I mean by that is goals are not, well, at least the good goals that are going to lead to fulfillment, in my opinion, are not about obtaining things. They're about becoming. So it's becoming and not obtaining. And so the becoming happens in the journey towards the goal or around the goal. The goal is just a reference point to tell you which direction you're going. And so when I think of success and what it looks like to be fulfilled, I use the definition of reflection and angular change. So again, I kind of have engineering influencing my thinking quite a bit, but when I think of it, it's like it's not which direction you're going. It's not even necessarily how fast you're going in that direction. It's, are you reflecting? Are you paying attention? And then when you're paying attention, once you reflect, do you make a conscious decision to change in some way? So maybe you realize, because you have your goal, oh, I moved 3 steps in the opposite direction of my goal. Okay, well, I reflected on it, so that's good. And then, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to change my course? And I make a conscious decision. As long as I'm doing those 2 things, to me, that's what success looks like. It's not moving towards the goal. It's not obtaining the goal. It's, am I reflecting and am I making conscious angular changes? Am I being an agent in my life instead of just kind of riding on a wave somewhere?
Yeah, Collin, I'm going to combine my last 2 questions because they're sort of interconnected. And I'm curious, I know you're still a relatively young guy, buddy, but I'm curious, when you look at the proudest moment of your life today, how do you think you would define that? And when you look at your individual, personal, and professional legacy, how do you want that to be defined?
Yeah, so I think my proudest moments are getting married and having my first son. Those are my proudest moments. And so I think that ties in with legacy. It's like, I think it would be great to influence a lot of people directly, but I don't know that that's really necessarily how I measure success in my life. I measure it in terms of, am I living in alignment with my values? Which my top 3 values are keep it playful, wrestle with God, and love and respect. I could define those more, but I don't know if we have time. But anyway, am I living in accordance with my values? And if I'm doing that, then I think I'll be proud of whatever legacy I leave. And if I don't live in accordance with my values, I'm not so sure. So that's my focus. And what exactly that legacy looks like, I don't know, and I don't need to know. But I think as long as I stick with those things, then I'll be proud.
Well, Collin, I have to tell you, you're already off to a running start, my friend. I want to, first of all, thank you for being here this afternoon, and ask you if people want to get connected with you, my friend. What's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, I used to throw out a bunch of different websites, but I think the thing that's most consistent is my email address, and I feel fine just providing that because I like to hear from people. Yeah, if people want to reach out and chat for whatever reason, my email address is curiositijump@gmail.com. So yeah, if you want to send me an email, if you want to chat about learning or life or anything else, feel free. I'm happy to connect with new people.
Well, I was thrilled to connect with you to talk about curiosity, learning, and life, buddy. I hope I brought you value through this conversation and really challenged your line of thinking for the better, my friend. I know you did it for me, so I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me, buddy. Your work in the space of educational equality and learning is most appreciated, and I thank you for the time this afternoon, buddy. It's most appreciated.
Thanks, Kevin. It's good to meet you.